So I want to welcome you all to our panel discussion, Research on Happiness and Well-Being. We are going to have a pretty simple agenda, really. We're going to start out with some brief introductions. Everyone will just very briefly tell you about themselves and their research. And then we're going to move on to answering some questions that we think are interesting that we prepared in advance. And then we will move on to questions from the audience via the Zoom chat. We prefer that to the Google Doc because I don't think any of us will actually have time to go back to the Google Doc, but we're really eager to have questions and comments, suggestions, anything you want to share is welcome. And if you have a question that's specific to someone on the panel, then you can just put their first name and then put the question, or if there's several people, or if you just want an answer and you don't care who answers, then just post the question in the chat. Okay, so I'm very excited about the four that are joining me today. Every single one of them, I realized that a few minutes before our session, every single one of them either has a book that you can purchase on Amazon or has a book on the way that you can pre-order. So that's pretty exciting. That's everybody on the list but me. If you're wondering what the letters are after their names, Ethan is from psychology. The rest of us are actually marketing professors, but very interested in happiness and well-being. So what I'd like to do is for each person on this list, starting with Ethan, going down to just introduce themselves briefly. Feel free to plug your books because I know you all have them. And we also have Raj here who has Coursera and edX classes on happiness and well-being as well. Ethan, take it away.
Hey folks, thanks for coming. My name's Ethan Cross, professor of psychology and actually management now too recently at the University of Michigan. So it makes me a little bit less of an out-group member, not quite marketing, but getting closer to you in the hallways. I study self-control, how people can manage their emotions to make them work for them rather than against them. I've got a new book called Chatter, The Voice in Your Head, Why It Matters and How to Harness It. And in that book, what I look at is what happens when our inner voice runs amok, leads us to ruminate or worry, which can very powerfully work against happiness and well-being. And in the book, I talk about why that happens and what tools exist for helping people regain control of those conversations that we all have with ourselves at times. So thanks for inviting me to be here.
Thank you, and I can highly recommend the book. And then Raj, you're next.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Raj Raghunathan, and I'm a professor of marketing at the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm very interested in the topic of happiness, and there's a bit of a story behind how I got interested in it. Most people don't associate the business world with the topic of happiness, right? So it's unusual for somebody in the business school to be working on this, but you wouldn't think that looking at all these marketing professors. Maybe it's just marketing professors rather than professors in other disciplines. So I've been teaching a course on happiness for the last 10 years at the University of Texas, and I also teach at the Indian School of Business as a visiting professor. And as Michal mentioned, I have a book. It's titled, If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy? It's a medium seller, as I like to call it. Ethan's book seems like it's on the way to becoming a bestseller if it's not already, just based on the number of reviews and everything. So congratulations on that. And I also have a couple of online courses, one on Coursera, which is called A Life of Happiness and Fulfillment, and another one, more recent one on edX, that's targeting more the business world. And that one's titled Return on Investment and Happier Employees and Return on Investment course. So HEROIC is the acronym for the course. Over back to you, Michal.
Great. So I can also recommend Raj's book, and I've also started your Coursera class, but I haven't finished it, but it's wonderful so far. Raj also has an excellent book. And as I mentioned before the session officially started, both Raj and Ethan have Audible versions, and both of them read the book themselves, which I think makes listening to a book, gives you kind of an extra sense of what the author is saying because you hear their voice, and they're both very good. They have good voices too. So highly recommend both books. And Zoe and Aaron have books on the way, which I'm planning to get. But Zoe, you're next.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, Michal. Nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Zoe Chance, and I've been doing research for a while, mostly in behavioral economics that's related to happiness and well-being and the drivers of all of that, like healthy eating or getting out of consumer debts, self-deception, also giving, charitable giving, volunteering. And over the past few years, I've started focusing intensely on interpersonal influence, because this is one of the best ways that we can get those things and opportunities that make us happy. I teach the most popular course at Yale School of Management. It's called Mastering Influence and Persuasion, where it's really a well-being course masquerading as a course about influence. And I've just turned in a book manuscript for a book called Influence for Nice People: The Science and Magic of Becoming Someone People Want to Say Yes to. And I'm also just starting work on a Coursera course that I'm excited about. I think a lot of us working in this area of well-being are doing many of these outside things because we're working on well-being because we care about it. And so we want our findings and ideas to actually translate to meaningful impact.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And I pre-ordered, so I'm going to get the book. I can't recommend it until it's out, but I'm looking forward to that. And Aaron, all yours. Aaron? Oh, he's there. I saw him. Aaron, are you there?
Now,
yes.
Can you hear me? Much
Yeah,
better.
I can hear you now. Fantastic.
All right, there we go.
Yay. Yay.
I've never actually used Zoom before, as you can tell.
Oh, wow.
No, that was a joke.
Oh. How did you manage that?
My work is in two areas. I do a lot of work on happiness and how it relates to income and materialism and consumer behavior. I also do a lot of work on the psychology of love, but with the twist of when people love activities or objects as opposed to loving people, and how the psychology of love works in those situations. And for my 2 cents worth today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how those two different areas connect. I do have a book coming out as soon as I finish the damn last chapter that I'm supposed to be finishing now, but I'm talking to you instead. And it's called The Things We Love: How Our Passions Connect Us and Make Us Who We Are.
How wonderful. Thank you for that. I'm also looking forward to that one. I am the underachiever. I do not have a book. I do research on emotions and decision making, and I've recently started doing some research on happiness and well-being because I started looking at dysfunctional behavior, and it was interesting to me that the #1 predictors of things like compulsive gambling and binge eating were social isolation, and then experiencing negative affect frequently was the second biggest one. So that's one thing. And then I also started teaching a happiness and well-being class as a pet project. And I've never enjoyed anything more in terms of teaching, and I love teaching normally. And I've never worked so hard on a class because it wasn't an area where I walked in with lots of expertise, but it's just been very rewarding. So looking forward to hearing what other people have done in that area. And we will move on. Okay, we've got some questions that we pre-put up here, and then we're going to let you guys take over. So actually, this is a nice one because everyone volunteered to answer this, and that's what's been your most interesting research finding related to happiness and well-being. We just go in the order of the names. So Raj, Ethan, Aaron, Zoe, and me. And I don't know why the women are second. That's random, Zoe. I'm sorry.
All right. So let me go first. There's quite a few findings that I find quite interesting in some of the work that I'm doing, but the one that I would pick for this is what we call the fundamental happiness paradox. The idea is that most people believe that happiness is their most important goal. And we know this from other people's research, and we've done a survey ourselves with, in various surveys, we have 16 to 20 big life goals, like making a lot of money, being successful, being beautiful, attractive, having great relationships, being happy, etc. And we ask them to, in some tasks, to rate them, in other tasks to rank them. And happiness always comes as #1 or #2 on that list. In some of the lists, it comes in as statistically insignificantly different, but nevertheless as #2 after relationships. So you would think that most people, most of the time, make decisions that increase their happiness. But it turns out that they often sacrifice happiness for the very goals that they actually think are less important to them. So I'll just walk you through a very quick kind of a vignette, thought experiment. So imagine that you're in a very wonderful relationship, and this is from the perspective of a woman, but you can easily kind of imagine it from the perspective of a guy too, a heterosexual woman. I should be like very specific. So imagine that you're in a beautiful relationship with this guy who's got great attitude, great sense of humor, very supportive, everything that you're looking for, except that the guy is a little bit plump and you want him to lose weight. And so you give him, tips and advice on how to do it, eating well, sleeping well, exercising, and so on. And all of it seems to go in through one ear and out the other, right? Nothing sticks and he never does it. And then one day he comes home running to you, very excited, and he tells you that, hey, I met this person at the gym, and she's convinced me to do a set of things that I'm pretty sure are going to work, and I'm going to be able to lose weight. And you ask him, what did that person tell you? So it turns out that she's told him almost exactly what you've been telling him all along, right? Eat well and exercise and sleep and so on. And so that's the scenario. And then in one condition, we ask participants, what's the happiness maximizing thing to do? And then we give them two options. One option is pat the guy, your boyfriend, on the back and tell him that I'm really, really happy for you, that somebody's convinced you to do all these things, and I'm pretty sure it's going to work. I'm happy for you, right? Or be upset and be a little bit angry. And most people ask for an option C, which is be angry, but then also pat him on the back. But I tell them, no, you got to choose one of these two. So one set of participants do that. And the other set of participants, we don't ask them what's the happiness maximizing thing to do. We just ask them, what would you do? Okay, what is, pick the one that seems most instinctively to be the one that you would pick to do. And what we find is in this scenario, about 20% of people rate, the option B, which is to pat him on the back, and maybe it was option A, but the option which involves encouraging the boyfriend as the happiness maximizing one, but nevertheless pick the one that is not the happiness maximizing one. Okay, so that's just a very quick and dirty example of this idea that people often sacrifice happiness for the sake of other things. In this case, probably ego or being right or something. And we have a bunch of vignettes in various contexts. We have it in job contexts. We have it in contexts of food and beauty and physical attractiveness and so on. And so that is the one that I would pick for this question.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Next one is Ethan.
Super fascinating. So, this question is such a challenging one because in many ways it feels like one has to choose between their children because there's so many findings in this space that are relevant. So I'm going to give you a very short explanation of two. So I'm kind of going to break the rules, but I won't take up much time.
That's okay.
So cool. So the first finding concerns the fact that we are much better at giving advice to other people when we're struggling with problems that undermine our well-being than we are taking our own advice. And this is actually research that was spearheaded by someone who's in the room here, Igor Grossman, who's got his camera off, but has got a spectacular head of COVID hair right now, if you want to indulge everyone, Igor. And so this is actually, there's a name we gave to this called Solomon's Paradox, named after the Bible's King Solomon, who is famous for being able to be this wise leader. People traveled throughout the Middle East and afar to get his counsel. But if you look carefully at his own life, he was absolutely terrible at making wise judgments. He got into a bunch of love triangles, ultimately led to his kingdom's demise. So that's a phenomenon that I think is pretty widespread. And what's really cool is that we've learned that there are ways that people can overcome this tendency, how people can become better advisors to themselves. And it involves doing something called distant self-talk. So essentially coaching yourself through a problem using your own name, really leveraging the power of language to shift your perspective and have you think about yourself like you were someone else. So come on, Ethan, how are you going to manage this situation? That's been a really neat finding. If folks are interested in trying that tool out on their own, the one caveat I think is very important to give is in all the work that Igor and I and others have done on this, we always look at how distant self-talks when people silently use this tool. So I wouldn't recommend walking down the streets of any major city coaching yourself out loud through your own name. If you feel compelled to do that, make sure you've got AirPods in. That can help a little bit. So that's finding number one. The second finding really refers to a category of findings that I find just fascinating. And I talk a lot about this in my book. There are lots of tools that exist for helping us manage our happiness and well-being and our chatter that involve regulating ourselves really from the outside in. That is, there are ways of interacting with the physical spaces around us that can have implications for how we feel. And there are a variety of external or outside in tools that are out there, and they range from things like enhancing our exposure to green spaces, to organizing our spaces when we're feeling a lack of control, to engaging in rituals, very highly structured sequences of behaviors. And I think a lot of these tools are not necessarily on people's radar, but they're things that many people spontaneously do to boost their well-being when they're under stress. And I think that's really neat. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Aaron to take the baton.
All right. So as many of you are probably aware, there's a very well replicated finding that people who are materialistic, who are really interested in getting money and having money and shopping and spending and all that stuff, tend to be less happy than people who are not so materialistic. And I was interested in how this would relate to people who love brands. And so I have replicated this finding now probably 20 times. It's extremely stable. And what we find is, again, the same finding everybody else does. People who are materialistic tend to be unhappy. And as you might guess, people who love brands tend to be materialistic, because that's your, if you said, what's your stereotype of a materialistic person? You'd say, oh, someone who cares about all these different brands and really, wants to have the labels showing and all that, right? And that totally works out. So you would think then that people who love brands would also be unhappy. That would make up the whole logical package. But actually, people who love brands tend to be significantly happier than people who don't. And that's very strange. And I've been trying to figure out why, because, you still do have this finding that materialistic people are less happy, and that loving brands makes you materialistic, but something else is going on. So the nearest I've been able to figure out is that people who love brands tend to be very focused on things they actually own. So they say, I love this product, I own it, I use it, it helps me, we have fun, I love this thing. Whereas materialistic people don't actually like the objects that they have in their life. They're all about, if I only had this other thing that I don't now have, then everything would be better. So loving objects seems to be related to gratitude in some ways, whereas materialism seems to be more related to jealousy. And even though they're correlated positively with each other, this difference seems to make a difference for happiness.
That's really interesting, Aaron.
Right.
And Ethan and Raj, this is fun for me to listen to. Rather than look for best, biggest finding ever, I thought I would just share with you my freshest, interesting, paradoxical little finding from my most recent study, which has me curious and looking to investigate more, is asking people about how they feel about negotiating. And most people don't like negotiating. It's not surprising. So including in this study, when I asked people, 60% of men don't like negotiating, 83% of women don't like negotiating. So that's not a surprise. The weird thing, though, is when you ask people to describe their most recent negotiation and how they felt, the feelings that they had, they report very positive affect. And my hypothesis for this is that And so this is completely untested, but that paradoxical part is interesting. My hypothesis is that we have these most of us have generally negative feelings about negotiating because we are imagining these iconic negotiation situations, mostly not of our own, because hardly any of us negotiate very often. So we're not actually looking back in our memory to other negotiations we've had. Most of our experience is vicarious and watching movies, television, and those screenwriters love drama. And so what you see is a lot of power struggles and bullying and strong arming, competition, people trying to win and take everything from one another. That seems awful. I don't want to be part of that. But I don't think of myself as actually negotiating all the time. And I don't think of, okay, well, the last time I negotiated my teaching responsibilities, actually that went really well. Or the last time I negotiated with my partner what restaurant we're going to, that went really well. And actually even the last time I negotiated for a car, that went well too. And those just don't stick in our minds so much.
Super interesting. So Zoe, I'm going to have you help me do my negotiating since you're obviously really good at it. Really interesting. Really interesting. Everyone's stuff is so interesting. And I will say that the first finding Ethan talked about, I heard his talk and thought, yeah, and then I tried it and it was drastically awesome for my happiness and well-being. I'm someone who's always, self-talk, oh, you dum-dum, I can't believe you did that. You're such an idiot. But when I do it in the third person, not out loud, Michelle, you messed up again. You're so silly. I'm just much nicer about it and I'm not angry. So I did have to endorse that one thing, that technique that I thought, yeah, but I don't think that anymore. I think it's amazing. And all this research is so interesting. I actually alluded to mine, so I'll just say really briefly. So I've had two research projects that were not about happiness and well-being. One of them was about the failure of more than 50% of people who get bariatric surgery, which is seen as major surgery, super difficult and painful, literally shrinking their stomach in order to lose weight. More than half of them gain back all the weight within 5 years, or at least most of it. And that's a real serious health issue. It's very expensive surgery, blah, blah, blah. So when we were looking at who succeeds and who doesn't, the number one thing was social support. If they had social support, if they felt cared about in general, then they were successful. Whether they knew what they needed to do in terms of eating healthy and exercise, they all knew. They all got trained. They all knew that broccoli is better than ice cream if you're trying to maintain weight loss. It was whether they felt social support and then how often they felt negative affect. And I also looked at compulsive gamblers. And again, it wasn't that they thought gambling was good. It's not that they thought, oh, I'm going to make money. They didn't necessarily think that. The number one predictor was, do you feel isolated and alone? Do you feel like you have social support? If the answer was no, they were more likely to engage in the destructive behavior. So why I think that's important is because what it's saying is when we study happiness and well-being, we may also be finding ways to help people not do things that are either destructive to society or destructive to themselves, or very often both. So happiness and well-being can cure a lot of evils beyond just making people happier. And I think therefore it's even more important than I thought it was. And it got me excited about this research area. So I'm very grateful for that. Okay, fantastic. Our next question, I need to, what is your favorite research supported tool for increasing your own happiness and well-being? And it can be based on your own research, or it can be based on someone else's research. You read something and you liked it and it makes you more happy and makes you more well. We'll start. Oh, by the way, I just realized the order is the order that people volunteered to answer questions. So Zoe, I'm sorry, it's not that I put you last every time. It's just by when they were volunteered. So if we do another panel, Zoe, I'll put you first.
Well,
Okay,
Zoe, why don't you go before me? We'll alternate.
Oh no, she's muted. Oh, Zoe, you're
Thank
muted.
you. Thank you. I was just going to choose a really simple one of a gratitude journal. And I read about it and was having my students write gratitude journals as part of our class before I started writing gratitude journals myself. And I hadn't understood until doing it myself that gratitude journaling is so helpful when you feel bad. I just didn't get it somehow. And so now, in addition to a regular gratitude journal practice that I kind of sort of stick to, specifically on days that I feel kind of crappy for some reason, I just write a list of 3 things that I'm grateful for, and I get to take a big breath.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Zoe. I actually have been doing 3 Good Things journal for the last 7 years now. I wasn't doing it when I first started teaching this class on happiness, but I would talk about it as an effective technique. I would talk about mindfulness as an effective technique, but I wasn't doing those, and I felt a little bit like a imposter, you know, a hypocrite. So I started those, and I can vouch for the 3 Good Things journal. It's just awesome. I look forward to it every day. It puts me, I mean, it gives me better sleep. Lots of positives to emerge from it. But if I have to pick one thing that I do that elevates my mood 100% of the time, immediately, it is to go work out or go for a run. And on many occasions, I don't even feel like doing it. So I have to kind of push myself to do it. But literally, there hasn't been even one occasion when at the end of a workout or a run, I haven't felt better than I did before. So it's my go-to thing to do.
Fantastic. Ethan?
Okay, I'm not muted. So I, you know, one idea that I believe really strongly in is that there are no single tools that help us boost our well-being across all situations. And so I, you know, to be authentic, as Raj, you were saying, when you teach about something, you want to be consistent about it. So I actually practice what I preach, and I use multiple tools if I want to boost my well-being. So I'll give you a sense of what the cocktail, non-alcoholic cocktail is that I take. So I'll try to coach myself through a problem using my own name. I'll do it silently. I'll do something called temporal distancing. If it's an acute stressor, you know, a rejection letter, an uncomfortable exchange with someone, I'll imagine how I'm going to feel about that situation at some point in the future. Usually it makes it clear that I'll feel better, because I almost always do. I'll call someone up, someone who's particularly adept at helping me reframe the problem that I'm going through. Not all the people who I'm close to are really helpful in that way, but some are, and I make use of those people to help me. And then I will get outside, and whenever possible, and it's not always possible in Michigan, but I will try to take a walk in a green space and have that clear my head. So that's my go-to set of strategies.
Fantastic. Erin, you didn't volunteer for this question, but do you want to add, or you don't have to? Okay, I just want to make sure nobody. All right, so I actually use everything you guys said. Exercise is huge. I think I use most of what Ethan said. And so I totally agree with a gratitude journal. I will add something. I found a gratitude buddy online. I went to some talk on gratitude, and I posted, does anyone want to be my gratitude buddy? Which I thought was just a silly idea. And all these people wrote me who were like my age, and they had PhDs, and I thought it was gonna be great. And they were all very flaky. And one girl posted, she's literally half my age. She works in fashion, which anyone who knows me knows that me and fashion are like, like not fashion. We have nothing in common, and we have been sharing our gratitude list every day since November. And I really look forward to hearing hers as much as, and sometimes I don't feel like it, but she leaves hers, and I'm like, okay, I gotta come up with something. And then I just enjoy hers. And she told me she wouldn't do it if it wasn't for the fact that I always say, oh my God, I'm so glad you enjoyed that. I'm so glad. So even a buddy, I mean, that's a really nice one. But that was actually, I wasn't gonna share. I just loved all the ones you suggested. And Raj, if I don't exercise, I didn't exercise yet today. So that's why I'm kind of not as, but I will after this session. I'm looking forward to that. So I actually got an idea from 2 foster cats that I was keeping. Ethan alluded to this. It's a very lousy picture, but I sort of decided to foster kittens during COVID because, you know, it makes me happy and it's a good deed. And I had 2 kittens that kept breaking through the screens. They tore through screens. So I couldn't open the window without them tearing through the screens. So finally I let them out, and they love to climb trees. And so do I. I don't climb trees, actually. I love to be around trees. And this is embarrassing, but if you look for me on Facebook, you will see this. I hug trees, and Don't freak out. People look at you the way they look at you if you're talking to yourself, which I don't do in public out loud. I kiss trees too. Not every tree, like I'm not super promiscuous about it, but I hug and kiss trees. My Facebook page is me kissing a tree. So I'm really into it. And this time I'm teaching the happiness class and it's in their homework. They have to hug a tree. Kissing is going to be optional, but tree hugging will be a required assignment. And there is actual research on forest bathing, and even more surprising is tree hugging. There's people talking about grounding, being barefoot on the earth. But being in contact with nature, I'm serious, if you think it's insane, hug a tree and tell me if you didn't think it had an effect. So yeah, I'm a tree lover too. The cats now get to go outdoors every morning. I was supposed to foster them, but I fell in love. So they still live with me in their terrace. That's it. Okay, that was mine. Nature, 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 or hug a tree. There we go. Okay, next one. We had 2 volunteers for this one, which is, what important research questions do you think still need to be answered in this area? And Ethan and Aaron were the 2 to volunteer for this one.
All right.
So, I think we've done a fairly good job in the field at identifying specific strategies that promote well-being, help people manage stress, and really drilling down to deepen our understanding of how those strategies work mechanistically. What I think we've done a much poorer job of doing thus far is looking at how these different strategies come together. When I wrote my book, I came up with like 26 different tools people could use to manage their rumination and worry. And I could tell people about how those tools work, but what I can't tell people about with authority based on science is what unique combinations of tools they should use to manage the different kinds of stressors that they experience. And I think we're beginning to see a lot of evidence that it is about combinations of tools, not individual ones, that really pushes the needle when it comes to people's happiness and well-being. Just as an example of that, more than a couple of months ago, but earlier on during the pandemic, we did a study where we tracked people's daily anxiety dealing with COVID. And so each day we measured how anxious they were. And we also measured which of 18 different tools that varied in their healthiness that people use to manage anxiety, COVID-related anxiety. And the key finding was that it wasn't specific strategies that really modulated how they felt each day. It was using combinations of strategies. So the people who used the healthiest combinations of tools, the people who did things like exercise, distance, get support from others, and so forth, those people were on average about 30% less anxious than people who used the least healthy combinations of tools. So in terms of where I think we ought to start spending a lot more resources, it's studying how people regulate themselves in daily lives. And that is, I think, about combinations, not individual tools.
Super interesting. Aaron.
Yeah. So, by the way, Ethan, really, really interesting. Raj started off talking about this already. He referred to it as the fundamental happiness paradox, that we all say we want to be happier, but when it comes to our actual behavior, we don't often do things that will make us happy. And in particular, we have a hard time with perseverance. So people have mentioned gratitude journals. Some of you are continuing to write in your gratitude journals. That's fantastic. I applaud you for that. However, I hate to say this, but almost nobody continues to write gratitude journals. People, you can do this with your courses. You have the students do a gratitude journal. They'll do it for like a week. You ask them, how did it make you feel? They'll be like, oh, I'm so happy. This is fabulous. And then you say, okay. And then you wait a month and a half towards the end of the semester. And you say, by the way, how many of you are still doing the gratitude journal? Nobody is still doing the gratitude journal. And so like why people do this and what we can do to change it. And this comes to the very notion of positive psychology, is that, we shouldn't just look at things where people have some sort of a deficit or a diagnosis or a problem that can get them from bad to okay. We should help people get from okay to really good. but what we've discovered is that if you, for example, have a high level of anxiety, so you're at bed because you've got too much anxiety, that experience of the anxiety every day reminds you, oh, this is important, you need to fix that. And so it's a constant incentive that gets you to pay attention to that problem and to get yourself up to okay. But if you're at okay and you're not experiencing that anxiety and you want to just get up to really great, there's nothing reminding you every day that, boy, this is an issue. And people just don't really do much with it. So for those of us who love this idea about how do we get from like okay to great, I think that the biggest challenge isn't finding what's going to do it, but how do we help people stay motivated to keep doing the things that we already know work?
That's great. These are such interesting questions. I do want to suggest if someone wants to do research with me on accountability buddies, it really has made a difference. Vicki is my fashion writer in London, who's half my age, and she's really made a difference in my life. And she says that that she's so happy, and if we miss a day, we're both like, oh, you didn't leave a message. Are you still going to do? Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. So I think accountability buddies, when I don't feel like it, oh my God, I have to leave her a message about my gratitude list. So that's just one suggestion. Maybe we can cooperate on that research. I don't know if it's already been done, but it's working. Okay, so the next question, and again, if you guys didn't volunteer for this question, my panelists, you can just say, hey, I'd like to answer it too. So don't feel that this is based on who volunteered. I didn't pick who to answer which question, just so you all aren't wondering, why she's only asking two people. Okay, so what advice do you have for people interested in doing research in this area of happiness and well-being? We'll start with Raj. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. I just
great.
realized it. If you can kind of imagine in your mind's eye a 2x2, right? Or two kind of axes, the x-axis and the y-axis. And the y-axis has all the dependent variables and the x-axis has all the predictors or the independent variables. You pretty much know what a researcher's objectives are if you know what the predictors are and what the dependent variables are. And I think that almost any research question, particularly in the social sciences, or maybe only in the social sciences, not so much in the natural sciences, is amenable to happiness being inserted into that kind of grid, either at the predictor level or as a dependent variable or as a mediator or as a moderator. So if you just ask yourself this question, how might happiness be thrown into the mix? I know that doesn't sound like an interesting approach. It just seems like, additive or marginal, kind of pushing it. But sometimes you come up with, great research problems or topics using this approach. So one of my papers kind of like came about in that way. Okay, so we were talking in Kim Kaufman's class. She was my co-chair in my PhD about group decision making. And one of the things that we know is that people tend to conform to other people's opinions on things. And so we know that is a phenomenon that goes on. But a question that hadn't been asked was what happens in the process of conformity to happiness. So if I don't like a movie and somebody else likes it, and I'm sitting there, do I hate the movie even more, or does it pull up my liking of the movie and therefore also my enjoyment of the movie? So in other words, is happiness shared doubled or, and sadness shared half kind of a thing, and which is what we use in the title as well. So that is one thing that I would suggest if you're interested in the topic of happiness. The other thing that I would suggest is to kind of look at the various stakeholders that I think are very important when it comes to happiness. So we talk about happiness of consumers, obviously, and Aaron has done a lot of great work in that area. So have you, Michelle, and Zoe too. But we could also think about happiness of citizens of countries. We could think about happiness of retirees. We could think about happiness of couples. We could think about happiness of kids. And I think that to some extent, the set of recommendations that we have are going to vary a little bit depending on who the stakeholder is, just based off of their, where they are in their life and the context. The final thing that I would suggest, advise people to do is just do it. You know, I think that a while ago, this was such a weird area, especially in the business school, I think. And, you know, hats off to people like Aaron for spearheading and being the kind of, you know, front runners when it came to this topic. But really, even to this day, I get kind of weird looks down the corridor in my business school, you know, when people realize that I do work on happiness. So I do think that it takes a little bit of courage in a business setting to do it. Maybe, Ethan, you haven't really faced any of it, but I think that, you know, you should follow your passion in that sense, right? I mean, that is one of the biggest things.
Raj, just to interrupt you, Raj, I'm studying people talking to themselves using their name. This requires a lot of courage, enormous amounts. I'm just joking with you.
No, good point. Yeah, so those are the set of thoughts I have on this.
Fantastic.
I would just like to also add.
Good, because I was going to ask for more volunteers. Great.
I'm studying people who really love objects, and I've heard examples that there are some people who would actually hug and kiss a tree. I can't imagine anyone doing that, but I've heard that some people would go that far.
Yes, that is taking it to the extreme. By the way, yeah, Vicky is not on this call, but she's going to watch the recording. Anyway, so my advice was just do it. So Raj, you stole it. You stole my advice. But I will say, and it's kind of, everyone sort of alluded to it. I think Zoe alluded to it as well. Ethan, you've been doing this type of research from the beginning, right? But I think there's two things. One is, we heard a talk this morning, it was earlier on the schedule, about talking to strangers. It's a lot easier to get people excited about your research who are not academics in your field if you're doing happiness and well-being research, whether they're academic, whether they went to college or high school, or, you know, are a brain surgeon or a lawyer or whatever. Happiness and well-being is something we all care about. And it's just interesting and important to everyone. And so you can get ideas from different people. I would also say, you know, a couple of people have sort of alluded that maybe, you know, you're marketing, advertising, you know, shopping. There's something very rewarding about studying happiness and well-being. The idea that I could have a finding and, you know, people could learn about it, can make their life better. Super rewarding. So my advice would be just do it, and also talk to strangers, which was a session this morning. But you get to talk to strangers about your research, and they don't just sort of look at you like, yeah, I'm not in business, I don't want to hear this. So that's kind of an awesome thing. So mostly just encouragement more than advice. Does anyone have anything they want to add to that from a panel?
Yeah, I'll add to that as well.
Oh,
bringing back the idea of social support and tying into what we're all saying in this part, just finding people that you really like, that you enjoy the company of, and who you feel happy with is even more important when you're doing research on happiness and well-being than it is generally all the time. Because whatever research topic you're studying, the experience you have in your own life with that topic becomes so salient. And something that I do when I'm starting something hard or doing something hard is I join a group or start a group of people who are doing that same hard thing. So I've started a lab group in my PhD program and a lab group as a professor. And now I'm at this point where, like I said, I just turned in a book manuscript and I have to get to the marketing, even though I'm in the marketing department. I actually used to be a marketing person. I was a brand manager for Barbie in my past life. But for all of us, self-promotion feels like, oh, it's so scary. So I've started an academic book author marketing posse, and I've invited the people on this panel who have books. And Michal, you have to join us when you write one.
to write a book.
Yes. Yeah. So just get the social support that you need to do the research that you enjoy.
Okay. Awesome. This is such good advice. Really good advice. Anyone else?
I'll throw in one additional nugget, which is, you know, for those of you who are here and are starting out and trying to find your questions to study, just to think really carefully about what those questions are. For me, what's always been really helpful is to think about, when trying to determine what to study, does this question I'm trying to answer have the potential to either substantively move our understanding of people, I'm a psychologist, forward, or in the case of happiness, like, does what you're doing, if you answer it, does this question have the potential to substantially alter our understanding of how happiness works? Or does it have the potential to substantially help people who are striving to be happy? You know, if the question I'm thinking about can meet either of those criteria, I do it. If it can meet both, I definitely do it. Now, most of the time, the studies don't end up coming through on meeting those goals, but knowing that I'm searching for one of these kind of, I have this big picture goal guiding me, it sure makes the process a whole lot more fun and exciting. And the process can at times be really arduous. And, you know, I second what Zoe said about working with good people. I mean, that helps people you like make the process less arduous. But so does being really motivated and really believing in the importance and the purpose of what you're doing. So take the time to do a little soul searching in that regard.
I want to, I actually have a serious comment to make quickly here, following up on what Ethan said. I totally second what you're saying. And I've noticed, having written reviews for journals for many, many years at this point, a very strong pattern. And that is many really bad papers focus on a strategy of filling a perceived research gap. So what they're really doing is they're looking for something that nobody has talked about before. They call that a gap. And say, we're going to fill this research gap. And what that does is it says we're going to start some sort of a new topic. And it's very difficult to do that well. Occasionally someone will do that really well and it'll be a hit, and that's great. And, you know, I'm not saying that it's fundamentally wrong, but it just correlates incredibly highly with a paper that has little impact on the world and does not in the end get published, and is just destined for obscurity. Whereas if instead you say, here's what research has been talking about, and here's what one person said, and here's the next person, here's the next person, and how do I add the next step in that conversation? So how do I build the next story up on the building? Not how do I start a new building over in a swamp someplace that nobody cares about? That if we could just stop the whole research gap stuff, I wouldn't have to review so many horrible papers.
Well, and just to jump in, Aaron, and I second that as well. So we're just second and thirding each other back and forth here. What's I think really in my world, I mean, I would summarize what you just described as doing programmatic research, which is the mainstay of science and what advances it. And I think the added bonus of doing that is sometimes when you take person A, B, and C who don't align and you provide the integration, sometimes that integration that you provide does create that building next door, and you didn't even know it when you started. And so I think there's real benefit that can be had by adopting the strategy that you're laying out. All right, I'm shutting up for the rest of the panel. Bye-bye.
Thank you. To our last question before we open it up to the audience and get to hear what you guys want to know about. For those, and there's 3 of us, with experience teaching courses related to happiness and well-being, what advice do you have for others who want to teach in this area? So we'll start, why don't we let Zoe go first and then Raj, just so I won't keep feeling so guilty. Okay, if that's all right, Raj, mixing it up. Great. Oh, but you need to unmute, Zoe. Unmute. Oh. We need to hear you and see you. We're really demanding.
Thank you. Thank you. We've been talking about impact in multiple points in this conversation, and it's so important when you're teaching a class about something like well-being that students are having an opportunity to do some sort of practice that impacts their own personal well-being. And maybe that's obvious, but I bet whatever class you're teaching, you could potentially do a little bit more. In my class on influence that I told you is secretly a class on well-being, we have weekly challenges, and that's really the whole class is, and this is really why the class is popular, that you do 3 or 4 challenges outside class that help you down this path of self-development by the end of the class. And Erin, they do a gratitude journal. They do have to turn it in every week. They don't all keep doing it afterward. However, there have been students that continued getting together in New York and in California and doing these practices because they were working and they had social support and they had a group of people to do it together because it was fun. So I'm going to just grab a link for anybody. It's not that this is like the greatest set of practices. It's just, here's a set of practices that are fun for students to do. And they've been doing it for now, I update it, but for like a decade that I've been teaching it here. So I'll grab it.
Thank you so much for that. Raj, you've got Coursera, you've got edX, you're teaching in India, you're teaching in Texas. You're like the teaching happiness, well-being guy. So I'm looking forward to your wisdom here.
Michal, actually, we know that helping other people and being grateful to them and engaging in acts of altruism, etc., make us happy. And so I'm going to try and be a little bit altruistic here. I hope this is not altruism. I'm going to let you go before me. Oh. Because you've always been going last. That's not fair.
Oh, yeah, because I'm a moderator. I don't have books in court. Oh, gosh. So now I have to, what is my answer for teaching? So I would say two things. One thing is that I have all these exercises too, and I'm actually interested in learning about more of them. So I'm really grateful, Zoe. Thank you so much for being willing to share resources. So I have different exercises that I have them do. And by the way, up until now, I taught it as a mini course. Now I'm teaching it as a full-on intensive. But one thing I talked to them about was that they are their own guinea pigs, self-hacking. Someone calls it me search instead of research. So I want them to do everything and then journal about what effect it had, and then go back at the end and decide. It doesn't really matter that 90% of people feel happier when they keep a gratitude journal, or that people feel better when they exercise. If it doesn't work for you, okay, that's not your thing. Figure out what works for you, because we talk about research and there might be significant differences, but everyone really wants to know what's going to make me happy and well. So one thing is to just keep telling them, I want you to pay attention to what works and doesn't, and then commit. And so I give them a new exercise. I'm going to be giving them one. It's a 1 month intensive, 4 hours, 4 days a week, 3 hours a day. So it's crazy scheduling, but I'm going to have them always pick from all the things they've done that they carry over to the next assignment. So they're always doing two things, the new thing and the thing they did before that was most effective. And I think they really like that. So if there's 3 things they do and 2 of them really make a difference and one of them's like, then that's okay, because I tell them that's not a waste of time, because trying something and discovering it doesn't work for you is me search or research, right? It's learning what works for you is part of this whole thing. So that's one thing. And the other thing is I'm very rational. So I share my own silly little anecdotes and stories, and they really appreciate it, even if it's a little self-deprecating. So I had this one assignment where they had to come up with a silver lining of something that upset them. And this was really stupid, but I ordered ginger ale and I got root beer, and I passionately hate root beer. Like, I'm not sure if I was on a desert and I was dying of thirst, if there was just root beer, it would be very hard for me to drink it. And I told them I was so upset. And then I asked, well, what's the silver lining? And I realized, oh my God, I can give the 6-pack of root beer to my neighbors and just say, hey, I got root beer. I ordered ginger ale. And I gave it to them. They were so happy. And so I just told them the story about how I literally got upset about something so trivial. And then I realized it ended up being wonderful, because my neighbors were thrilled to just have me say, oh, no, don't pay for it. I got it by accident. So just a silly little stories of a place where I applied the exercise they're doing that week makes them feel much more connected to me and makes them more willing to share their embarrassing, silly stories when they had a cow because someone gave them root beer instead of ginger ale. So I think sharing of yourself makes a huge difference. And that would be my other piece of advice. And now I want to hear from Raj.
Thank you, Michal. That was really good. Thank you, everybody, really, I mean, for all your responses to the questions. And I know this is the last question and we're going to move to the questions from the audience, but I did not want to forget to say this, that I really appreciated being on this panel, learned a lot. I'm very, very curious about Ethan's book. It's been on my radar, but now I really want to read it starting tomorrow or something. And I'll take a look at Zoe's. You just sent us that link, Zoe. Thank you very much for sharing this. I was very curious about those activities. And it seems like some of those are actually kind of pushing them to do things that are out of their comfort zones. So that's awesome. So in terms of teaching, again, this is perhaps particularly true for people in the business school. I think that you're going to get a little bit of pushback from people, why this course, what's happiness got to do with business and things like that. And I think that you can just point to people who are already doing it. My course is again called Creativity and Leadership. It's not called a happiness course, but everybody knows that it's a happiness course, right? So, and the reason why it's called Creativity and Leadership is because when I put the course together, I actually wanted to call it A Life of Happiness and Fulfillment, which is what my Coursera course is called. But the chair of my department told me that, look, that title is not going to fly in the dean's office. They're going to want to see some direct connection to business. And so I asked him, what do you think I should call it? And he said, you're a creative guy, you'll come up with something creative. And it turned out I wasn't very creative. I didn't venture too far from the word creative. I just came up with Creativity and Leadership. But at the same time, everybody knows that it's a class on happiness. And so if you have to do things like that, which perhaps are not ideal because, you're kind of, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't feel authentic to call it something else. But I think it's a practical thing to do. So sometimes you have to market your course that way that the dean's office is okay with it. Everybody knows in the school that it's a happiness course, but it still continues to be called that. So that's one that, basically floated up to your chair. I don't think that anybody's going to argue against the importance of the topic, because I think people, especially now, right, people recognize that stress levels are high, now because of the pandemic, but even otherwise in the business world, everybody knows it, that stress levels are high. And so I think well-being as a topic is more acceptable now, even in business circles, but nevertheless, you might face a little bit of a pushback. So, just call us, right? Call me, or, I know a bunch of people, I don't want to reveal their names here because I don't know how comfortable they are, but they've called me and asked me, they've told me that, hey, I want to teach a class like this, but how did you get your dean's office to approve it? So just call me and we can talk about it. A lot of people say this, right? If you want to learn a topic, then teach it. I think that if you really want to learn about a topic, write a book about it, right? Because you really have to clarify your thoughts, and especially if it's a trade book or a mass market book, then you have to say the things that you want to say in as efficient a manner as possible and as simple a language as possible, and so on. And so I think the process of, I'd be very curious. Ethan said some time back that, he knows of 26 different strategies. And I don't know how many of them made it in the book. I imagine that it was less than that because you said 7 chapters. But I mean, that is the process of refining, right? Of kind of like, sticking to what's absolutely essential and cutting out the things that maybe are not as central to your course, etc. So I do think that writing a book or at least a blog is going to be super helpful in this regard. I want to put in a plug for online teaching. I know that Zoe, you said that you're going to offer this course, and I don't know what your experience has been so far. It was really eye-opening for me at so many different levels, including that you are going to have to convey the material in kind of modules that are maybe 5 to 7 minutes long, not more than that. So it really forces you to kind of chunk up the material in such a way that it's kind of fast-paced, but every 5 or 7 minutes you're finishing up a particular topic or a subtopic, and you're moving on to the next. And that gives you so much more flexibility in terms of kind of, removing modules or topics from one session to another, or if you just judge that the live audience is tuning out, then replacing something that you were going to talk about with an activity and things like that. So I found creating online courses to be really, really useful at many different levels, including that you're going to have to be a little bit of an entertainer. And maybe it doesn't suit every personality, but I think everybody could be a little more entertaining than they otherwise are. And I think it really gets you to kind of, wear the entertainer hat when you're facing a camera and you don't have a live audience in front of you, because you're going to have to project that energy somehow, right? You can't really feed off of the audience's energy. The final thing that I'll say here is, I mean, Zoe is already doing it. I imagine that other people are doing it anyone who's teaching a class like this. I think almost any topic would benefit from a set of activities and exercises that are more to do with doing than to do with writing or talking. So getting them in groups. But I think that happiness as a topic is particularly conducive to that approach, because it's something that everybody is really, really interested in. And whether people realize it or not, they have their own pet theories about what makes people happier or what makes them happier. And so when you're talking about different techniques, they are constantly kind of asking themselves, is this true for me? Have I tried this? Has it worked for me or not worked for me? And so on. And a lot of times people get a lot more confident about a particular strategy for increasing happiness, like, for example, keeping a gratitude journal, if they talk to other people and they discover that somebody else has been doing it and it's really worked for them and so on. So plus it also has this added advantage, which I think is super important in a course on happiness, that they get to know other people at the level of the real selves, not at the level of the PR selves, not at the level of their what their resume says, but at the level of their values, at the level of their personal life experiences. So one of the assignments in my course is writing out your autobiography, which seems like a daunting task. And sometimes people are even scared to embark on it, but almost always people end up loving it. And they especially love reading other students' autobiographies, because you can imagine in an MBA school, everybody comes with this, like they're very nicely packaged. And so it's very easy for every student to feel that they are the imposter, right? That everyone else seems so well put together and articulate and strong. And here I am, inside I'm a mess, but I'm projecting this image. And it's nice for everybody to get proof or evidence that everyone's actually got self-doubts at some level, right? And so one of the things that I do is I actually share my own autobiography with everyone. And it has, like basically I've been very vulnerable in it, and warts and all, including my, few kind of bouts. I wouldn't want to call them depression, but moments in my life when things haven't been going well and they were dark, and my experiments with recreational drugs. I put it all out there. Okay. And I think that once they read that, they realize that, hey, it's okay for me to do it as well, to put it all out there. Of course, I tell them that, look, you got to kind of only go to the point where you feel comfortable. Don't overdo it, because you don't want to be, stressing out about whether you went too far, right? But I do think that the course on happiness offers an opportunity for people to get to know each other at a really deep level. And the sense of belonging is, we know, maybe the most critical determinant of happiness. And I think that if you use this as a platform for encouraging that among your MBA students and undergraduate students, whichever class you're teaching, I think it'll really benefit them.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Can I just reinforce something that Raj said?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or are we out of time already? No.
You've got, and then we'll do the
Okay.
Q&A with the audience. I think we still have like 24 minutes or something.
So I teach a class. I teach a class on self-control, which is related to happiness, but also a class on teaching. That's called the Teaching Academy, and we run all of our graduate students in the psych department through it. And I want to just reinforce two things that Raj said, which are basic principles that we talk about in the Teaching Academy. They have to do with how to make any topic really powerful in terms of how it's received among students. The first thing is to show your enthusiasm. And I think it's clear that every person on this panel is enthusiastic about what they do. This is a really simple principle, but you would be surprised at how often instructors don't display it. And I think the question to ask yourself is, if you're getting up there to lead a class and you're not enthusiastic about this material, if it is not, in technical terms, blowing your mind, why should students be interested in it? So really be enthusiastic, and then two, be vulnerable. Do share something about your personal life, and clearly people vary with respect to how much they feel comfortable doing that. I think there's probably a correlation between how long you're in the field teaching and how willing you are to do it. But sharing things about you, it humanizes you. It makes you more of a human being, and that that actually serves, Zoe, you may talk about this in your book. I'm looking forward to reading it. Like, that creates empathic connections between two people and between the group that I think are also really powerful for learning. So I wanted to highlight that, and then also just say one other thing, which is anyone who's thinking about teaching already has something really strong going for you. Almost every person in your class is going to care about this topic. This is not molecular biology, nothing against the molecular biologist or the organic chemist, but I don't think everyone goes around their life on a daily basis wondering about the chemical composition of whatever. I don't even know what, an apple. I'm looking at an apple core right here on my right. So, but what we do often care a great deal about is our own happiness and other people's happiness. So you already have students' interests, and now it's really about how to shape it.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I'm actually going to very briefly share an experience I had because you made me think of it. So I had a lot of students, when I did the little mini course, I had all these students who were like beautiful, and they were zooming from this gorgeous house, and they're a super supportive family, and they were talking about how, they're very depressed and they're very anxious. And I had one student, he was my happiest student in the class, and he's completely disabled. He cannot talk. I didn't exactly understand, but when I saw him, like, he's laying down like this. He cannot talk. He cannot move any limbs. He has a 24-hour assistant. He's majoring in analytics. I don't see how he can be happy. But he was just super cheerful. All his shares were super cheerful. He wasn't lying. And, when different people would share, and then his assistant would read his thing, and he'd talk about how he loves sports, and he loves watching TV, and he loves his family. I think we just all learned so much from just that, right? Like, this was the most cheerful guy, including me, in the group. So it was because I shared vulnerable stuff, other people shared vulnerable stuff, not super, like, not every dark secret, but some things, right? Some not so cool things. And other people shared vulnerable stuff. And then they heard him, and it really kind of brought into, that it's not your situation, it's your perspective for so many things, right? He has a loving family, has a lot of great things. He's got, all the support. He's got a wonderful dog, a support dog. But I just think because people were vulnerable and sharing, they learned so much from each other. And there were lessons from that weren't necessarily from what the person said, but just comparing and contrasting the extent to which happiness didn't seem to be about what they thought it would be. So that's just sort of I'm just re-emphasizing what you guys said, which I agree with so much. Really, really appreciate it. Okay, so now we're at the part where the audience gets to ask questions. So we've got 5 people. Fantastic. Christian.
Thanks a lot. It's probably easier to say it than to type it. Thanks, first of all, for all your comments and insight. It was really great to hear those and really inspiring. I wanted to catch on Aaron's point when he said, well, we seem to be motivated quite a lot if we are in pain and we're suffering a bit to do the things that bring our happiness up. But once we are all right, we struggle to keep the motivation going to get us extra happy. And I just wondered if I would turn this into a research question, what kind of things would you advise me or anyone to look at? What would be interesting topics to look at? What would be your gut feeling? What is the issue here? Just any thoughts on that would be great. Thank you.
I could jump in. I think there are things that you could do to temporarily boost happiness in that state, some of which we've talked about already, like the gratitude exercise, doing things for other people, certainly doing things in your own head, like fantasizing, thinking about the vacation that may be coming up really in concrete detail, thinking back to an incredible experience you've shared with someone. These are all ways of temporarily boosting your happiness. I think what's so interesting about Aaron's point and the question you're asking, Christian, about why it is that we struggle to go higher up. And I think, just thinking about emotions, and if you think about emotions as adaptive responses that help us deal with the situation at hand, and we have all these different kinds of emotions that activate these these patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving that are appropriate for certain kinds of situations. Different positive emotions may be appropriate in certain situations, but not across the board all the time. And so I think one interesting question that comes up here is whether our default state is simply not designed to be always at, in the 9 to 10 range on a 10-point happiness scale. Maybe the default state is meant to be somewhere like a 6 or 7.
That's interesting. Anybody else?
Yeah. So, Christian, I'm going to try and answer the question that I thought. I'm going to try and answer more directly your question. I do think that it's a very prevalent phenomenon that people, when they're feeling maybe depressed or are in pain or feeling negative, they want to get out of it. But when they reach a state of neutrality, what can they do to continue to stay motivated to do those things that pull them out of the negativity, right? And can continue to make them feel positive. So 3 things that I think are useful for me, at least, right? One is to just start doing the activity, right? So I told you about working out at the gym. It definitely puts me in a good mood. And there are many, many days, I wouldn't say they are the majority of days, but certainly not, trivial, but, let's say around 30% of the days when I don't even feel like going to the gym, right? I don't feel like working out. I feel like doing something else. I may be taking a nap or, chatting with friends or something. But what I do then is I just tell myself, look, I'm just going to go there and then I'm going to come back if I don't feel like it. Okay. But I'm just going to go there first. And then I go there. And once I go there, I know it's a bit of a mental trick that you play on yourself. And maybe if you're particularly self-aware and you think that the whole thing is a charade and you're being delusional, then it won't work, but it works for me. Then I just tell myself, I'm just going to get on the treadmill. I'm going to do the 10-minute warm-up, which I always do before I work out. And then there's something about that momentum of having taken action that continues to propel it, I feel. Okay. So we do have a paper called the Jumpstart Hypothesis, and it never got published. We have some data that were kind of middling in terms of support. And so it went around a little bit here and there, and then we dropped it. But that would be the idea. The second thing is that I've noticed that when things are more feasible, operationally more doable, then you're going to probably do it. And so in other words, we always think that it's the motivation to do things that is the most important thing, but I actually think it's the feasibility of doing things that's the most important one. So back in the day when we were working from offices, our gym is literally bang opposite our building, right? The Gregory Gym at the University of Texas. And so it was super convenient for me. In fact, I couldn't avoid it. When I wanted to, go back home, I would have to encounter the gym. And not a big surprise, I guess, that I actually ended up working out a lot more when I was working from the office, because every day I would just, it would be on my path, literally, back to the, so, and you can apply that principle across a variety of different domains, I feel. If you want to eat healthy, then put your healthy snacks right where you can reach them. Put the unhealthy snacks in a little bit more difficult reach place and things like that. So the feasibility is very important. And the final thing is taking a page out of, I think, Michal's book, which is
I don't have a book.
I know, but
just
you're still gonna have a book, right? But basically,
have a book.
Right, doing things in groups, right? So actually, coincidentally, I have a buddy too, a gratitude buddy, but she's the one who writes to me rather than me telling her about the stuff on my thing, because she approached me after my online course saying that she's going to take her own life, and I said, don't do it. I just want to talk to you. And then it's been now 3 years, and every single day, I'd say 360 days or 365 in the last 3 years, she sends me 3 good things that happened to her via WhatsApp. And there's something about doing things in groups that makes us feel more motivated, which is why I think that when you want to run a marathon, you join a group. I think that's been shown to be more effective than training by yourself. So that's the other thing that I would suggest, is that, if you kind of do it in a group, I think that you'd find that you're more likely to do it.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to? Okay, we've got 2 more things. I think Anastasia, I believe you were next, and you've been really patient, so it's great. I just, can someone unmute Anastasia?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Hi all. Thanks for very motivating and stimulating discussion. And thanks for the tips. I've noted down a few. I think I would like to comment on this motivation to feel greater when you feel good. And it sort of came up to me when it was mentioned initially. And I was wondering if you considered that there's actually, it's actually healthy not to feel great all the time, because I'm thinking of when do we naturally feel great? What happens? Usually a great achievement, or maybe when we fall in love, that's something that we go above our normal good state, feeling good state. And these times are quite, if they were to last for too long, I think we'll be delirious in a way, that it's just a state that maybe cannot be sustained, feeling extremely happy all the time. Maybe we wouldn't be even functioning. And I know when I fall in love, I can't focus on my work and I struggle. So it feels great, but I feel dysfunctional in a way. So and although I love feeling like that, it just sometimes you just wish you don't feel like that, because you just need to get on with things. You can't even sleep sometimes. So I was just wondering if this feeling great goal is something to aspire for. And I understand when you don't feel good, you do things to feel better. But when you already feel good, why would you feel better than good? And there's something about emotional equilibrium, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the set point of balance. And there's other research that says about a healthy ratio between a positive and negative affect. So there needs to be negative affect to appreciate the positive in a way, because otherwise there's no comparison. And if we were constantly on a happy mood, if it was possible, we wouldn't know the difference in a way. So these things are kind of wandering in my head. And I think, the observation that, we can get people in the lab or in an intervention, throughout an intervention, to perform the task or the interventions and feel better, but they don't sustain that. And I was wondering if that ties into how much they identify with these interventions. And I was really fascinated by the finding that Aaron mentioned, that materialistic people are not happy, or less happy than non-materialistic people, whereas those who are into brands are happier. And I was wondering if that had to do with self-identity. So if someone is surrounded by items, objects that they identify with, somehow they feel greater, or they kind of boost the sense of identity, wearing or using branded items. So, and that's what makes them feel more important, perhaps, or more successful. There is this kind of identity, a dimension in there. And maybe this is what's maybe missing from this kind of interventions that are available, that yes, you can suggest something, but how much do we get people to identify with this suggestion in terms of integrating it as part of their self-identity, and not just giving a promise, if you do this, you'll feel better. But I think just identifying with what you do is very important and could help sustain the activity. Thank you.
Does anyone want to address a piece of that, or? I mean, oh, great. Okay.
I'll respond just briefly.
Oh, the materialism thing is you. And now Benita actually asked about that. Benita is our next person, and she asked about the materialism research. She's an academic as well, and does research in this area, and is highly awesome. I know her.
All right, so just it's very confusing, this, trying to sort out this puzzle. I actually call it the Bermuda Triangle, because you've got like materialism, happiness, and brand love. So it's a triangle, and it's kind of weird. So it's the Bermuda Triangle. I do think perhaps that materialists in general, I mean, this goes with the way materialism is measured in some of the major scales. Materialists do invest a lot of their identity in brands and in products and what they own. And it could be that this strategy doesn't work for a lot of people. And as a result, on average, people are, doesn't lead to a lot of happiness. But it does work for some people, right? It may not work for everybody, but there are some people who, look for their identity through these brands, and maybe they just really find it. Maybe it's really working for them. And that's why they're, happy, because the strategy is paying off. So that's something I'm trying to look at now. And I don't really know, I don't have the data yet to know if that's correct.
Super interesting. Yeah, I just have a hypothesis with zero data, and there may even be research on this. I think some people, it's interesting. I went to a memorial for, some of you knew Sid Levy, who was a very famous marketing professor at Northwestern. Mm-hmm. And I went to the memorial, not of his, but of his wife. And so it was before he passed recently. Such a wonderful person, such a wonderful researcher, but also a wonderful person. I was so blessed to have him as a colleague. But what he said about his wife was she lived her life in Technicolor. She never did anything in pastel. And so I think some people just are willing to do the ride, and some people want to be somewhere in the middle, which isn't exactly addressing the issue. Is if you're happy all the time, how do you know that you're happy all the time? Because your reference point is how you normally feel. So I think that's a great point as well. But I also suspect, and maybe it's not as relevant to your question, but it just came to mind that I think some people have a comfortable range that's not, because what is happy? I mean, there's happy, oh, it's a nice day. And there's euphoria, right? Where you're kissing trees. That's one extreme. I mean, that's not necessarily internal, that's external. But I just think there's a range, and maybe we should all figure out by trying what works for us. And maybe for some people, shooting for euphoria isn't very realistic either. I mean, I don't think anyone can be a 10 all the time. It would take a lot of dark chocolate. And ask your questions. Now, Benita, are you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Calling from my iPhone. Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. Just want to say that it's really a very helpful panel for me. I actually, Aaron quite answered my question. So I'm just adding to that question that I had. So Aaron, my question specifically is about materialism, and I can see that materialism view has changed now. And as I'm currently working on a positive psychology paper, so I'm just trying to understand, as materialism has changed to self-signaling, that is the success dimension, how does it impact the cognitive component of subjective well-being? Have you actually studied that? And if you have studied that, can you please share some perspective? Thank you.
Yeah. So there's a lot. So there's two main, as you probably know, right? There's two really main definitions of materialism. One from Marshall Richens and one from Tim Kasser, and they're quite different in sort of what they look at. And in some ways, I kind of like the Kasser one better. His is about your value priorities. And do you prioritize extrinsic money, fame, popularity over intrinsic kinds of values? But Marshall Richens, which is used in the consumer behavior literature much more, has three subscales. And one of them is this success dimension. It's the idea I measure my own success and other people's success based on what they own. And what's interesting about that is that tends to have little or no negative relationship with happiness. So that's not the part of the materialism that's really driving this. The main part of materialism that tends to have the strongest and most dependable relationship with unhappiness is what Marsha calls the happiness dimension, which is the belief that I would be happier if I had more money and more things. And I do sometimes wonder about this a little bit, because I kind of think, look, if you're someone who's really unhappy and someone comes to you and says, would you be happier if you had a straw hat? You'd be like, yeah, because I'm really miserable. You know, hey, I'd be happier with the straw hat. Why not? Right? So in a sense, if you're really unhappy to begin with, you're going to be inclined to say, I would be happier if, and then, anything out there. Nonetheless, that's really the element of materialism that's got the strong and enduring relationship, that, it's bad to think that you can become more happy if you had more money and stuff. And it's not so much the identity stuff. And what's interesting also is that from sort of a political, social perspective, people like me who tend to be really down on materialists and think materialism is bad, and we're nice sort of liberal, intellectual, progressive types, right? The part of materialism that drives us crazy is the success stuff. It's not not someone being unhappy and wishing they could have an ice cream cone to make themselves happier. It's the whole, I've got to show off how much money I have because that's how I show I'm successful. And if you don't do that, I'm going to look down on you. That's the stuff that grates on people and really draws the objections to materialism. But that doesn't seem to be the thing that makes the materialists themselves unhappy.
Fantastic. So it is now 2:42. I know a lot of my panel needs to leave because they've already stayed 2 minutes late. I feel terrible that I didn't get to all the questions. So sorry if I wasn't awesome in timekeeping. Maybe I should have blabbed less. But what I'd like to suggest is anyone who can stay. Or do we actually have to leave the room because there's another group coming in?
No.
Read one of the bosses here.
There's no session in this room today anymore, so it's free.
Okay, for panel, thank you so much. I actually love this, even if it was just, it's great to have the audience, but I enjoyed it so much because you guys were so awesome, and I'm looking forward to hopefully organizing more panels with this fabulous happiness and well-being team. I learned so much. Every answer from every single one of you I enjoyed. So I'm willing to stay if anyone else is willing to stay for the questions that are left over. But I just, from the bottom of my heart, I hope I see you again. I'm going to think of more things. So if you don't want to be on my future panels, you better let me know because you're going to be getting invitations. I love hearing this group speak. I love this topic. And I would also like to say happiness and well-being researchers tend to be really cool, nice, awesome people in groups. So really enjoyed this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And also thanks to the audience. But if anyone has a question, I'll hang out. Whoever else wants to hang out can hang out. Not until, 3 hours, but another 10 minutes. And to anyone who has to go, thank you for coming. You were wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Michal. I learned a lot too. Bye.
Thank you, Michal. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So does anyone have a question I can answer? Tell me the question and I'll try to answer it if I can.
The question was about this whole thing about people from outside well-being research kind of thinking it's a bit off or weird that we study this. And I think also even within psychology, there's some criticism of the methodology not being rigorous enough or something. And what do you think we need to focus on in terms of methodology in order to make sure that it is a serious science, even though it's a fun science?
Right. Rigor is not topic specific. I think clinical depression can be studied sloppily and poorly and unrigorously, and it can be studied rigorously and well. And I think that's true for happiness and well-being too. You're in psychology, right? So yeah. You have it. So look, I think the happiness, well-being, at least in the United States, but I think globally, that has just soared recently. Way more people are interested in it. There's a lot of resources, I can share them with you, but like Greater Good at UC Berkeley, it's not just happiness research, but they have a lot of, psychologists mostly. It's run by a professor of psychology at UC Berkeley. And I think, method is method and topic is topic, and you can study this rigorously. And what's been interesting for me, so in my class, and I know you're asking about research, but in my class, there's a lesson here. I was shocked how many of my students said they were clinically depressed, they were on antidepressant, they were seeing a therapist, they suffer from severe anxiety. I don't know if COVID spiked it, or I didn't expect those people to show up in my class. I thought they just come because they're a 5 and they want to be a 6, or they're a 7, they want to be a 9. There were some people who were, and they were like, should I go off my meds? And I go, no, don't go, still see your therapist, don't go on your meds. I'm not solving everything. I'm just enhancing. But I guess what's interesting, they got a lot out of it too. And so the happiness and well-being is useful whether you're generally okay and you want to be happier, or whether I had a student who told me she hadn't gotten out of bed except to go to the bathroom and get food, and she was eating in bed. I mean, I was mortified. This is not what I expected. But she said the course really helped her. And so I guess what I'm saying is, if people think, well, that's not so important, making happy people happier, or people that are okay happier is not important, we have to help the really sad people. I think a lot of these findings end up being relevant, whether you're sad or depressed or fine or generally happy, but not super happy. I don't think it's useless for the people who are suffering the most. I think it actually can help the people who are suffering a lot, as well as the people who are generally cheerful. Like, I think of Raj as a generally cheerful guy, and yet he gets so much out of this. Zoe's very upbeat too. I mean, from what I know of them, and they still get all out of it. But then I had that student who was literally eating her meals in bed, hadn't changed her sheets, told me she hadn't showered. This was at the beginning. I was like, oh my God, I was just gonna, the big responsibility, but it didn't cure her. She didn't walk out of it and then she became a celebrity dancer, but she said it helped her a lot. And she appreciated that I cared and talked to her. And, Raj was sharing the thing about the suicidal girl. So I think if anyone questions, because I think sometimes the method, I totally think method, good method and bad method, rigorous, not rigorous, doesn't matter if you're studying happiness and well-being or the suicidal depressed people or whatever it is. But, so that's one thing, rigor is not the issue. But validity, I think if we can actually show examples where whether you're dealing with the very miserable who need the most help, or if it lifts both, then you're actually helping more people. You're helping the sad, you're helping the okay, you're helping the people who are sometimes happy, but not always be happy more often. And I don't know if that's helpful, but I think what works for someone who's a 3 works for someone who's an 8 and works for someone who's a 0, not exclusively, but still enhancing, right? Medication plus a gratitude journal, seeing a therapist, and also exercise. I don't know if that's helpful at all. But I hate to say it's hot. This area is hot right now. So at least in the US, no one's going to say, why are you studying that? In the US, like, everyone's looking for someone in this area in psych departments, and suddenly even in business schools. I mean, that's amazing. So I would encourage you, if it's what you love, do what you love. Do something you love or you will burn out. And also, even if you can force yourself to do something you don't care about, what an awful way to live, that you're working hard and you're super productive and you don't find your own research meaningful. Like, that's a terrible, I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
Thank you so much for putting this together.